Let's make some rabbit stew.
There we go. Rabbit with the bow.
Clean this place off.
Okay, the first thing we want to do is we want to cut up the rabbit so that we can properly stew it. There's a certain way I like to go about doing this. Once you get your rabbit, you're going to want to clean it off in the sink. Once you've got your rabbit clean, you want to remove the front shoulders. To do this, all you have to do is just open up his armpit and cut right down it. The next thing I like to do is remove the flank and ribs. Now, most of the time, I'll remove these together and discard them, but in this case, I did decide to keep one of the flanks. Actually, no, I kept both the flanks. Next thing that we want to do is we want to get his backbone. Now, in order to do this, what we want is to take his back straps off of the rib section of his carcass. Once you peel those back straps off of his carcass a bit, you can find his last rib. Once you find his last rib, you'll want to cut straight down through that spinal cord, separating his rib cage from the rest of his backbone. Next, you'll want to sever this backbone area right in front of the hips. We'll want to remove these hind quarters because there's not much meat on the pelvis, and a lot of time there's a lot of extra bone that we don't want that's in that pelvis. For this recipe, it works best with 3 to 4 rabbits. I believe I had 4 or 5 in this case. I had a lot of rabbits for this recipe. In the same pot that you will be stewing in, add oil and get that oil screaming hot. Next, you want to make up a very basic breading recipe. For me, I just use flour and salt and pepper. Now take those breaded rabbit pieces and put them in the oil and brown the outsides. Careful not to overcrowd your pan or else you will lose oil heat and you won't have as good of a brown on the outside of that rabbit. Now we're not trying to cook these rabbits all the way through. All we want to do is just get the good sear on either side of that rabbit. Let's clean this cutting board up real quick. For your vegetables, you want at least 3 different kinds. You'll want your onions, celery, and carrots. You're welcome to use other vegetables if you want them. I just decided to go with these 3. Also, you should use yellow onions, not red onions. This is because red onions are a little bit sweeter than yellow onions, and they just don't make for as good of a stew. Make sure when you remove the rabbit, you leave as much of the browned residue behind because that's what adds a really good flavor to your dish. Now, generally, what you should do is add your onions first, wait till they get browned, then add your carrots and celery. However, I was very pressed for time, so I just threw everything in at once. In the last 30 seconds to 1 minute of your sauteing, when all your vegetables are browned, you'll want to add at least 1 tablespoon of garlic, or about 3 cloves. As soon as you smell the garlic and it becomes very fragrant, you want to add your rabbit back to the pot and then cover it in stock. You want to add stock to your pot until you cover about 90% of the rabbit or 100%. It doesn't really matter. Once you put the lid on, go ahead and turn your stove down to a low simmer and then give this thing about 3 to 4 hours. After the 3 to 4 hours has elapsed, the meat should be fall off the bone tender. I mean, this stuff should be super, super tender. If it's not and it's not cooked all the way through, give it at least another hour. Something that is important to mention is that if you do not pick the bones right, you will have a lot of leftover bone fragments in your stew that you can chip a tooth on. This is why when you clean your rabbits, breaking off the foot at the joint instead of cutting the bone is so important. Additionally, this is why I prefer to not keep the rib cage. The rib bones will break off and end up in these little tiny chunks that you'll chip a tooth on, and it's not fun. The last thing is adding your dried seasonings. Here are the seasonings that I chose to add, and then you just got to mix those back in there, and then your rabbit stew is ready to be eaten. Alrighty, so there you guys have it. That's how you can make a very basic rabbit stew. I've been using this recipe for, probably 3 or 4 years now. It's a good recipe. It always works with rabbit. The only downside to it is that you do need a lot of rabbits for it. Another thing that I would like to add to this is that rabbit is it's not a very dark meat, okay? It's similar, actually, it's about the same as dark meat chicken. Like if you think about a chicken leg and like rabbit, just the whole consistency of rabbit, they're extremely, extremely similar. So pretty much anything that you use chicken for, you can use rabbit for. Again, the big thing is just make sure you're cooking it all the way through and you'll have no issues at all. Like I said in the video earlier, I did make a couple mistakes, like with the onions and when I put everything in there. It's just, I didn't quite do everything right, but it doesn't really, this just goes to show it doesn't really matter. It's pretty hard to mess up this recipe. Another thing I would like to add, this is not like it's not like a recipe where you have to stick to the exact plan. The world is your oyster with this recipe. The sky's the limit. There's really nothing you can't add to this stew that won't make it good. So yeah, if you enjoyed the video, go ahead and subscribe, which I'll have like right around my face, and then check out some other videos we got. I got a bunch of new stuff on the way that I know you guys will enjoy. I'll see you in the next one.